Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we break down cybersecurity careers, interview prep, and real-world security scenarios. Today, we're diving into one of the most in-demand entry-level roles in the industry, the Cyber Risk Analyst, and giving you a complete breakdown of how to answer interview questions like a pro. Whether you're switching careers, coming from an IT background, or just stepping into cybersecurity, this role is often the launchpad for long-term success. So let's walk through 5 essential cyber risk analyst interview questions using the STAR method framework and get you ready to stand out. Question 1. Can you walk me through how you would assess the cyber risk posture of a potential client's environment? What key indicators would you look for? When engaging with a new client, the first step is to understand their business, industry, and regulatory or compliance requirements. This provides important context around the types of threats they may face and the minimum security standards they need to meet. My primary objective is to assess the client's overall cyber risk exposure and readiness to defend against modern threats. I do this by examining a combination of technical, operational, and organizational factors. By comprehensively assessing these key risk factors, I'm able to develop a holistic view of the client's cyber risk posture. I then synthesize my findings into a clear, actionable report that highlights the client's strengths, weaknesses, and recommended remediation steps. Question 2. How would you explain the difference between a vulnerability, an exploit, and a threat in the context of cyber underwriting? A vulnerability is a weakness or gap in a system, application, or process that can be leveraged by an attacker to gain unauthorized access, disrupt operations, or steal data. Vulnerabilities can exist in software code, misconfigurations, human processes, or even physical security controls. They provide the entry point or opportunity for a successful cyber attack. Some common examples of vulnerabilities include unpatched software, weak passwords, outdated operating systems, and lack of multi-factor authentication. Identifying and addressing vulnerabilities is a key part of reducing an organization's overall cyber risk exposure. An exploit is the actual method or technique used by a threat actor to take advantage of a vulnerability. Exploits come in many forms, such as malware, ransomware, phishing campaigns, distributed denial-of-service attacks, and more. Skilled attackers develop and deploy exploits to actively compromise systems and networks. The severity of an exploit depends on factors like the complexity of execution, the level of access or control it provides, and the potential impact on the victim organization. Highly sophisticated exploits leveraging previously unknown or what we call zero-day vulnerabilities pose the greatest risk. A threat in the cybersecurity context refers to any individual, group, or nation-state actor with the intent, capability, and opportunity to cause harm through cyber attacks. Threat actors may have diverse motivations, from financial gain and hacktivism to state-sponsored espionage and cyber warfare. Examples of major cyber threat actors include cybercriminal groups, nation-state advanced persistent threat groups, hacktivist collectives, and disgruntled insiders. The specific threats an organization faces depend on factors like their industry, geographic location, intellectual property, and strategic importance. Underwriters need to consider all 3 of these elements, vulnerabilities, exploits, and threats, when assessing an organization's cyber risk profile. A comprehensive understanding of these concepts allows them to better quantify the potential impact and likelihood of a successful cyber attack, informing their risk modeling and pricing decisions. Question 3. What do you understand about the MITRE ATT and CK framework, and how can it actually help identify threat actor behaviors like ransomware activity? Well, the MITRE ATT and CK framework is an invaluable tool that I rely on heavily in my work as a cyber risk analyst. Basically, MITRE ATT and CK is a comprehensive knowledge base of adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, that have been observed in real-world cyber attacks. The framework organizes these TTPs into a matrix of 14 high-level tactics, such as initial access, execution, persistence, and privilege escalation. Under each tactic, there are, dozens of individual techniques that threat actors might employ. This structured taxonomy really allows security professionals to better understand, detect, and mitigate the behaviors of malicious actors. When I'm assessing a client's cyber risk posture, I leverage the MITRE ATT and CK framework in a few key ways. First, there's threat modeling. I use the framework to map known threat actor groups and their typical TTPs to the client's environment. This helps me identify the specific threats they're most likely to face, based on factors like their industry, geographic location, and digital attack surface. Then, there's gap analysis. By comparing the client's security controls and processes to the MITRE ATT and CK techniques, I can uncover potential weaknesses or blind spots that could be exploited by threat actors. This really informs my recommendations for strengthening their defenses. Now, when it comes to ransomware detection, the MITRE ATT and CK framework is particularly valuable for understanding and detecting ransomware activity. Ransomware groups often follow predictable kill chains, using techniques like phishing, lateral movement, and data encryption. Mapping these TTPs to the framework lets me develop more effective detection and response strategies. Overall, the MITRE ATT and CK framework is an indispensable tool that enables me to take a more proactive, threat-informed approach to cyber risk assessment. By deeply understanding the tactics and techniques of adversaries, I can help my clients build more resilient security programs and make more informed decisions about their cyber insurance coverage. Question 4. Give an example of a recent high-profile ransomware attack. What tactics did the threat actors use, and what controls could have helped prevent or contain it? One that really stands out is the Conti ransomware assault on the Irish Health Service, the Health Service Executive, or HSE, in May 2021. This incident had a major impact and serves as a valuable case study for understanding ransomware tactics and, honestly, what effective security controls could look like. In the HSE attack, the Conti ransomware group leveraged a combination of well-established techniques to infiltrate the organization's systems and deploy their malware payload. First, tactic initial access. The threat actors gained their initial foothold through a phishing email containing a malicious attachment. This allowed them to deliver their first-stage malware and establish persistence on the network. Next, tactic lateral movement. From the initial infected system, the Conti actors used techniques like credential dumping and remote service execution to spread their malware laterally across the HSE environment. This enabled them to compromise additional systems and escalate their access. Then, tactic data encryption. Once they had achieved widespread access, the attackers were able to encrypt large swaths of the HSE's critical data and systems, including electronic health records and appointment scheduling. This left the healthcare provider, largely paralyzed and unable to deliver normal services. Finally, tactic exfiltration. In addition to the encryption, the Conti group also stole sensitive patient data from the HSE's systems. They threatened to publicly release this information if their ransom demands were not met. This attack had a devastating impact, forcing the Irish Health Service to shut down its IT systems and causing significant service disruptions. It really highlighted the severe consequences that can result from modern, sophisticated ransomware campaigns. Question 5. What are some key technical controls you'd expect a well-prepared organization to have in place against ransomware threats? First off, advanced endpoint protection is a must. This goes beyond traditional antivirus software. The organization should have an enterprise-grade endpoint detection and response EDR solution that can identify and block malicious behavior in real time, including ransomware activity. Next up, network segmentation. Proper network segmentation, using features like VLANs and firewalls, can help limit the lateral spread of ransomware within the environment. This, compartmentalizes the impact and prevents the infection from reaching critical systems. Then there's privileged access management. The organization should have robust controls around user and administrative privileges. This includes things like multi-factor authentication, just-in-time access, and auditing of high-privileged activities. Limiting excessive permissions is crucial to stop ransomware from escalating its access. Robust backup and recovery capabilities are also essential. A comprehensive data backup strategy, with both on-site and off-site or cloud-based backups, is key. The backups should be tested regularly and isolated from the production environment to ensure recoverability in the event of a ransomware attack. Vulnerability management is another big one. The organization should have a mature vulnerability management program that continuously scans for, prioritizes, and remediates software vulnerabilities. This helps eliminate potential entry points that ransomware actors could exploit. And finally, network traffic monitoring and analysis. The deployment of network traffic monitoring and analysis tools can help detect anomalous behaviors indicative of ransomware activity, such as unusual data exfiltration or communication with known malicious infrastructure. Question 6. How do multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection and response, and network segmentation work together to reduce risk? Well, let's break it down. Multi-factor authentication, or MFA, is a critical control for preventing initial access and credential-based exploitation. By requiring users to provide an additional verification factor beyond just a username and password, MFA significantly raises the bar for threat actors attempting to gain a foothold in the network. This really helps block phishing, credential theft, and other common ransomware delivery methods. Now, moving on to endpoint detection and response, or EDR. These solutions provide advanced, behavior-based monitoring and protection right at the endpoint level. They can detect and respond to suspicious activities that might indicate ransomware, such as unusual process execution, file encryption, and network communications. EDR gives security teams the visibility and control they need to rapidly identify, isolate, and remediate ransomware infections on individual devices. As for network segmentation, by logically dividing the network into discrete zones or segments, segmentation limits the lateral movement capabilities of ransomware. So even if an endpoint is compromised, the ransomware will be contained within that segment and won't be able to spread freely to other critical systems. This kind of compartmentalization reduces the overall blast radius and the potential for widespread disruption. When implemented together, these controls create a really formidable defense-in-depth strategy. MFA blocks the initial access that ransomware depends on, EDR detects and responds to ransomware behaviors on the endpoints, and network segmentation stops the lateral spread of any ransomware infections. This layered approach dramatically increases the effort and complexity required for a successful ransomware attack, making the organization a much harder target for threat actors. Plus, it buys crucial time for security teams to intervene and initiate recovery procedures. Question 7. If a client has outdated firewalls and no endpoint monitoring, how would you communicate the urgency to remediate these gaps in a non-technical way? If I identified that a client has outdated firewalls and a lack of endpoint monitoring, I would communicate the urgency to remediate these critical gaps in a clear, non-technical way. As a cyber risk analyst, my goal would be to convey the real-world business impact and risk in terms the client can readily understand. Here's how I might approach this. Mr. Client, during my assessment of your cybersecurity posture, I identified 2 areas of significant concern that require your immediate attention. First, your firewalls are running on outdated software versions that are no longer supported by the manufacturer. This means they are vulnerable to known security flaws that sophisticated cybercriminals can easily exploit. Imagine if the locks on your front door had known weaknesses. It would be like leaving your home wide open for intruders. Secondly, you do not have any endpoint monitoring or detection capabilities in place across your employee devices and servers. This makes it nearly impossible for your team to spot the early signs of a malware infection or hacking attempt. It's like having a house with no security cameras or alarms. You'd have no way to know if someone was breaking in until it was too late. These two gaps in your defenses put your entire business operations at serious risk. Outdated firewalls and lack of endpoint visibility make you a prime target for ransomware attacks, data breaches, and other devastating cyber incidents. I've seen firsthand the catastrophic impact these types of attacks can have. Companies are forced to shut down for weeks, lose millions in revenue, and even go out of business entirely. I strongly urge you to prioritize updating your firewalls to the latest secure versions and deploying an advanced endpoint detection and response solution across your environment. This will drastically improve your ability to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber threats before they can cause significant harm to your organization. I'm happy to provide you with specific product recommendations and a detailed implementation plan. But the most important thing is that we address these critical vulnerabilities as soon as possible. Securing your environment needs to be a top priority. Are you available to discuss this further and get the ball rolling on these remediation efforts? The key is to frame the technical gaps in business terms the client can readily understand, using analogies they can relate to, highlighting the very real consequences of inaction, and conveying a sense of urgency. My goal is to motivate the client to take swift action to mitigate these glaring security weaknesses. Question 8. How do you typically analyze and present cybersecurity findings to business or non-technical stakeholders? As a cyber risk analyst, my goal is to enable stakeholders to understand the implications and make informed decisions, not to overwhelm them with technical jargon. Here are the key principles I follow when analyzing and communicating cybersecurity findings. First, I identify the critical business risks. I start by clearly articulating the top cybersecurity risks facing the organization, framing them in the context of potential impacts to revenue, operations, reputation, and regulatory compliance. This helps stakeholders grasp the true business significance. Next, I use analogies and plain language. Instead of diving into the technical details, I rely on simple analogies and plain language to explain complex security concepts. For example, I might compare network vulnerabilities to unlocked doors, or malware infections to a viral disease affecting the company. I also focus on high-level metrics and trends. I present cybersecurity data in a concise, high-level manner, using metrics and visualizations that non-technical stakeholders can readily interpret. Key performance indicators like risk scores, vulnerability counts, and security incident trends are more impactful than raw data dumps. Then, I recommend prioritized actions. Based on my analysis, I provide clear, actionable recommendations that stakeholders can understand and champion. I group these into must-do, should-do, and could-do categories to help prioritize initiatives and investments. I also tell a narrative story. Rather than just listing findings, I weave the cybersecurity information into a narrative that stakeholders can follow. This helps them connect the dots between security controls, threat actors, and potential business impacts. Throughout the presentation, I engage in dialogue. I actively solicit questions and feedback from stakeholders. This two-way dialogue allows me to clarify any confusion, validate my assumptions, and ensure I'm addressing their primary concerns. By following this approach, I'm able to transform complex technical details into business-focused insights that resonate with non-technical audiences. This enables stakeholders to make well-informed decisions about cybersecurity priorities and resource allocation. Question 9. How would you handle a conversation with a client who pushes back on implementing a recommended control due to cost or complexity? I've encountered situations like that before where a client is hesitant to implement a recommended security control due to concerns about cost or complexity. When that happens, I always make sure to approach the conversation in a consultative, empathetic manner. First, I acknowledge the client's valid concerns. I know budgets are tight, and IT teams are often stretched thin, so I don't dismiss those challenges. Instead, I try to have an open discussion to really understand their specific constraints and objections. Then, I reframe the conversation to focus on the business risk that the control is meant to address. I might say something like, "I understand the cost and implementation effort are significant factors, but let's talk through the potential impact to your organization if this vulnerability were to be exploited." At that point, I provide concrete examples or case studies that illustrate the very real business consequences. Things like financial losses, operational disruptions, regulatory fines, and reputational damage. I find that framing it in those stark terms helps shift the client's mindset from just the technical details to the overall risk equation. From there, I work collaboratively with the client to explore alternative solutions or phased approaches that could achieve the desired risk reduction in a more cost-effective or manageable way. Maybe there's an interim control they can implement as a stopgap, or we can focus on the highest priority areas first. The key is maintaining an open, solutions-oriented dialogue. I avoid being confrontational or overly insistent. Instead, I position myself as a trusted partner who is there to help them navigate the complexities and make the best decisions for their organization. Question 10. You're asked to consult with a client on implementing a control they don't fully understand, like application whitelisting. How would you guide them? First, I make sure to set the proper context by explaining the business value and risk reduction that the control provides. In the case of application whitelisting, I would highlight how it helps prevent the execution of unauthorized or malicious software, drastically reducing the threat of malware infections and other cyber attacks. Next, I break down the technical details in simple, easy-to-understand terms. For application whitelisting, I might explain it as creating an approved list of applications that are allowed to run on your computers, instead of trying to block every single piece of bad software. I use analogies and examples that the client can relate to, rather than diving into complex technical jargon. I also make sure to address any common misconceptions or concerns the client may have. For example, they may worry that application whitelisting will be overly restrictive and disrupt legitimate business operations. I reassure them that with proper implementation and ongoing maintenance, the impact can be minimized. Throughout the discussion, I actively solicit questions and feedback from the client. This allows me to gauge their level of understanding and address any gaps or uncertainty. I position myself as a collaborative partner, not just a lecturer. Once I've ensured the client grasps the fundamentals, I provide them with a clear, step-by-step implementation plan. This includes things like scoping the initial whitelisting deployment, maybe starting with a pilot group, establishing the approval process for new or updated applications, defining the ongoing monitoring and maintenance responsibilities, and preparing employees for the changes through training and communication. I offer to provide hands-on assistance or guidance at each stage of the implementation. My goal is to make the process as smooth and painless as possible for the client. As you prep your star stories, remember to highlight both your technical knowledge and your ability to communicate with clients and stakeholders. That's what sets a great cyber risk analyst apart. Like, subscribe and tap the bell to catch our next episode, where we'll go deeper with even more interview questions and career tips. And hey, don't forget to comment below if you have any questions or thoughts.